Welcome to Take a Closer Look, a podcast by Squiz. We invite today's digital leaders to share their most epic wins and, of course, the failures that taught them their biggest lessons. So join us to ditch the jargon and get real. Come take a closer look, or as the Australians say, take a squiz. Ben Scott, thank you so much for joining me today on Take a Closer Look. I'm really excited to chat to you and dig into your career and your story and all the lessons that you've learned along the way.
Thanks very much for having me.
No worries at all. So let's start with the easy question. You're currently head of marketing operations at professional services firm Grant Thornton. So tell everyone a bit about yourself and what that role looks like in that firm.
Sure. So I've been with the firm now for 10 years as of July last year. And the role in that time has really evolved. So starting out purely in digital marketing and was brought in to build things up from scratch. And then 10 years later, my role's broadened considerably to include PR and comms, brand and design, campaigns, CRM and digital, which we kind of classify as like marketing automation, social media, things like that. So it's gone from just me to a team of 19, which it's been a pretty crazy ride, but a rewarding one.
So obviously you're saying you kind of started out in that traditional digital marketing, and obviously the role itself has evolved and kind of what you're looking after within the role. But obviously I think the digital marketing space has evolved massively in that time as well. I guess even prior to Grant Thornton, what got you into marketing and digital marketing specifically?
Yeah, sure. So I guess in terms of marketing, at university, I did dual degrees, one in marketing major from business management and a journalism degree. And I really wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go in. I just knew I liked words, but coming from a family business, very much had that business mindset. Growing up in that environment, all my siblings have very much gone down the path of sort of financial careers. And I think for whatever reason, I was always a little bit more creative. And so that sort of landed me in that choice of degrees. And then the pathway to digital just happened naturally, where in my first job, I was working for a family-owned construction and engineering business. And the very first job I got given was, here, can you fix the website? It's doing some funny things in the HTML. And I was given the time and the freedom to explore that. And all of a sudden I sort of had an understanding of HTML. And then from that point on, I always seemed to be given the digital jobs, whether it was, here, can you look at the CRM, or here, we need this email to go out to people. And it just, sort of followed me from there.
It's so interesting that you kind of make the point that you were sort of the more creative one in the family, and then in that role you were handed the reins as a dev.
Yeah.
Off you go and learn how to code and fix the website. And I love that as well. Just fix the website. It's just a little ask. And would your friends and family describe you as creative, or do you think that's evolved as well with how your role has evolved and kind of the way you look at things from a marketing perspective has evolved? I guess your friends and family and, both inside and outside of work.
Yeah, I think definitely from a family perspective, I think there's not a whole lot of creativity within the family. Like, we're all probably more, technically aligned, but I know my siblings would probably say that I was always more creative. I, like, as a kid, loved drawing and music and all those sorts of things. And then through all my 20s, I was a huge live music fan. Like, when I was living in the UK and stuff, went to a lot of gigs and played guitar and all those sorts of things. So there was always that sort of creative undercurrent, I guess. And marketing always seen that way of bringing a little bit of creativity to a role, along with, core business sense and I guess more the financial acumen as well.
So it sounds like you've had a lot of different influences in terms of, your family being maybe that more sort of technical and business side of things, and you having that sort of creative flair and the music interests. And who, I suppose, has inspired you along the way, either from a professional marketing and digital perspective or, outside of work? Is there someone in particular that you think, they really inspired me in some of the decisions that I've made along the way?
Yeah, I mean, being the youngest in the family, you, I guess, naturally look up to siblings and cousins and people like that. And, I've got cousins who are 10 years plus older than me. So they've always sort of just been at that stage ahead. And so you sort of see what they're doing in their career and learning from that. And the same as my siblings are 4 and 8 years ahead. So they've always been that sort of step ahead in their careers or wherever. So that's been a big part. But I guess within the marketing space, I'm a very big believer in learning. And one thing I always talk to my team about is, be that naturally curious and dive in. And so my inbox every week is full of newsletters from specialist people. So, analytics, it might be Avinash Kaushik, or in marketing ops, it could be Daryl Alfonso or Sarah McNamara. There's a whole heap of newsletters that I follow that every week I'm sort of digesting and going through. I guess with a broad role as well, rather than having that sort of one inspiration, it's more like diving deep into lots of little rabbit holes and following people who are specialists in that to sort of see, okay, well, how can we apply that? Where do we get an edge?
That sounds inspiring in itself. Like I've also got an inbox full of newsletters, but I can't promise that I managed to dive into all of them. So you're doing a very good job if you manage to stay on top of that. But I think, to your point, to kind of try and instill that in your team as well, because ultimately you can't be an expert in absolutely everything. You can't be the person who's kind of controlling absolutely everything. So you need to kind of inspire them, I suppose, as well, to want to keep learning about their particular area of expertise. So yeah, congrats on staying on top of these things, because I think that's something we all definitely aspire to. But I don't think many of us are achieving it.
Yeah, and I think all you need is that one idea. Like it doesn't have to be a finished solution, but if you read something or you're something on a podcast and you pick it up and you're like, yeah, maybe we could do that, and then it's then taking it back and going, well, how do we make this happen, or would this be possible, or how do we do it? And I think that's probably the important bit, is getting people to buy into that, rather than necessarily, you don't need to solve all the problems.
That, and we talk about that. We have a phrase that we use across the business called shower thoughts. We're basically talking about the fact that you want to be able to have listened to something, have read something, have thought about something, be in the shower thinking, I wish I could just do that thing, and then be able to actually go into work and have the tech or the resources of the team at hand to be able to implement it. And we think the importance of a marketing team and being able to execute on those shower thoughts is really high, because actually so much of the time they're kind of held back, or there's kind of hurdles in the way. So yeah, I love that. And feel free to use the shower thoughts terminology. You mentioned previously before you were in the UK for a bit, and you've had a really interesting career path from being in the UK, working in the Department of Health, and then into insurance institutes, and now into professional services. Has there been a kind of common thread connecting those roles across all of those different industries and markets and countries?
Yeah, I guess it's always been B2B, and I've always worked in services as well. So it's generally more complex sales funnels, sort of more complex buyer decision models, all those sorts of things. So it has I've always been interested in that, and how we bring other strategies or technologies or things from outside those industries into that, and think about how we change things. Because I think B2B, and particularly professional services, we've always had a bit of a bad rap as being a little bit behind the times, but there are people in the industry driving change. And I think thinking back through all those roles, there's always been an element of, how do we innovate? How do we bring in something new into this industry? And sort of, can we make a positive change here?
You mentioned as well about the first job where you were thrown in at the deep end, asked to fix the broken website. And I think, does it kind of almost feel like that was a starting point for you in taking that approach of, what can we do to fix things? What is it that we're trying to fix, and what's the best approach to do that? Has that kind of shaped your approach to digital in general, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. It's not a bad thing to be thrown into the deep end like that, particularly earlier in your career, where you're trying to figure out what it is that you're interested in, or what it is that you want to do. And particularly because marketing is such a broad spectrum. Like, when you think about it, you can do, if you're writing press releases, it's very different from, doing web coding. Being thrown in the deep end and having to figure that out, and trying to figure where you fit within the space of marketing. But it also, I guess, gave me, one, the confidence of, hey, you can figure it out. And, if you dedicate a bit of time and effort to solving the problem, then you can get to it. I think often with these things as well, it comes down to process as well. So, like, yes, you need to spend the time and effort to properly diagnose the problem, and then, scope out what the solution is going to look like. But you can often also put processes in place to make your life easier around that as well. So yeah, look, I think from that, I took a lot of things away, but probably the main one was confidence. And, as a young marketer, being confident that you could be thrown into a situation like that and figure your way out of it without necessarily needing to bring in an agency or anything like that.
Yeah, nice. And so you've been with Grant Thornton for 10 years. Things would have looked somewhat different in 2015. What did things look like then? And I think you said as well, you started as the first person on the team. So you were ground zero, I suppose. What did things look like then? And what's the kind of approach that you've taken to building from nothing as opposed to this team of 19 that you've got now?
Yeah, so I guess when I started, it was very much, and all the firms were like this, very much your traditional professional services marketing and BD setup with roles heavily focused on events, proposals, pursuits, things like that. So when I came in, I was very much the first digital marketing person. And I was given the remit of, we just needed a strategy around this. We need to build it from scratch. But it really was like there was no, we had to dig around for the Google Analytics passwords, getting into the website, it took a few goes to get it set up properly that I could actually access it. At that time, like LinkedIn was around, but it definitely wasn't embedded within that sort of B2B professional services space as it is now. It was more that sort of recruitment type angle. And yeah, social media was in its early days, but definitely not within professional services. So the way I was looking at it was, okay, we need to get the strategy in place first. And so the first year was really just sort of listening to people and trying to figure out the firm strategy and the direction we're going in, because we also had a new CEO starting at the same time. So he was at the time forming his new executive team and figuring out the direction of the firm. And so I was obviously just trying to base our digital marketing strategy off the back of that, as any good strategy should. But one of the things that was really clear was that we didn't have that foundational technology in place. We didn't have a CRM. We didn't have marketing automation. The website was sort of operating in a siloed space. So none of it was connected together. And probably for the first 3 or 4 or 5 years of that, it was starting to build those foundations. So implementing those systems, starting to integrate them, helping educate the business around what it is that we were trying to do and what we were hoping to achieve, and also how they could use it to, achieve their own goals in terms of sales or winning new work and things like that. So yeah, very much the first 5 years have been around building that foundation. And then the last 5 years has been more around optimizing it, starting to really drive the behaviors of people, showing our internal people what is available to them, how good it is. And literally every training session we ever run on it, people are like, God, I didn't know we had that. And once they see what is at their fingertips, they sort of realize the power of what's there. So yeah, it's kind of probably been the last 2 years has been around just driving that adoption and sort of getting the ROI on everything. And I guess probably the next stage is, how do we start to then incorporate AI, and how do we sort of supercharge everything from here on? How do we take growth from, between 7 and 10% a year to more like, how do we power up going forward?
And I think was the thing you're saying kind of around processes and kind of getting your processes and systems in order is so important. And also what you mentioned about as soon as people are seeing the training and understanding what's available to them, and I guess the data that's available to them, that's when they kind of sit up and take notice. And I'm interested to hear your perspective on data and how that can help you, particularly in the digital space, to, I guess, get people on board and show them that, physically show them the benefits of what you're doing and make sure that they understand the power of digital marketing.
Yeah, I think with anything, and often we'll get asked by other firms around like, where did you start and how did you do it? And I think part of it is quick wins. So in terms of like, I always advocate to people, as soon as you can, try and measure what's coming through your website in terms of revenue, and whether you have to manually do that from leads coming in through your contact forms and then making that connection to the work that came from it, or if you're more sophisticated and it can sort of happen automatically through your CRM and tracking processes. But having that story internally around, this is what we're doing, this is our success, we can see how much money is coming in from the website. And then when you start tracking it year on year, that then gives you the power to make that connection to your marketing activities to be like, well, we're growing the business here and we can prove it. And here's the dollars. And you're talking in those commercial terms with the business that they understand. So having those wins on board changes the conversation, and it also changes your influence within the business where they're like, okay, well, yeah, let's reinvest into this. How do we double that figure? And that's very much been conversations that we've had in the past. But data is critical. And I think, every business deals with this where it's around, the output that you're getting from your reporting is only good as the data that's being put into it. So I do think that's a constant battle. And one, though, I think that we'll see more spotlight on as AI starts to take off more and more is that the results you're going to get from those implementations is only going to be as good as the data that you have at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you made a good point there around talking in commercial terms. Obviously, within the professional services environment, that's what your audience is talking. That's what they're used to talking, and that's what they want to hear. And so, do you think there are any other sort of unique challenges in that sector that are kind of, specific to professional services, particularly around, I guess, the wanting to move people away from some of the more traditional approaches that they've maybe become used to and can't see a reason why they'd want to change it?
So I think COVID helped in this regard. Like before 2020, it really was fairly antiquated, like in terms of that approach. So I guess your traditional professional services firm largely based around thought leadership events, very face-to-face driven. And so all of a sudden when COVID hit overnight, events just evaporated. So all these businesses had to figure out, well, that's our BD channel. How do we win any work from here?
How do we get in front of people?
Yeah, how do we get in front of people? And so very much all of a sudden, like we switched from doing less than 10 webinars a year, which blew my mind because back in 2012, working at the Chamber of Commerce, all we were doing was webinars. Like that was one of our key sort of go-to-markets to members. To then coming into GT where we did none really at all, like we did a handful a year. And then in 2020, I think we did 90.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it went from like 150 events a year to 90 webinars. And then that slowly has scaled down. But I think what the business has realized is that webinars are very good for scale and particularly for top of funnel. And this is an ongoing conversation that we have constantly is around, well, what is it that you're trying to achieve with your campaign? Is it that top of funnel awareness piece? If so, let's look at doing a webinar. Or like, is the reason for the event, are you bringing people through the funnel? Like, are they actually on that buying journey or are we still trying to achieve what would be better done by a webinar? So yeah, we have that conversation all the time, but I do think it is a broader industry issue where people struggle to see what channel works best for what stage of the funnel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm completely on board with your use of webinars. Like as a director of content over here at Squiz, that's something that we've definitely seen. And I think you're right around the kind of the COVID push, but I almost feel like there was a sort of bad taste around webinars for a while where they were seen as kind of an old school approach. COVID definitely impacted that, but I still think it took a few years for the sort of resurgence, I guess, of webinars.
Yeah.
And I think now they are kind of, obviously to your point, COVID forced the fact and you had to then do 90 a year because you had to get in front of people. But I think now, again, to your point, people are seeing the value in them again. They're understanding that at that point in the funnel in particular, it's a great way to get in front of people and to share your expertise. So yeah, it's definitely something we're seeing too. And I think it'd be interesting to see how that kind of evolves over the next few years as well. One thing around that I think is, and it might not be to do with this, but the kind of generational shift in the workplace as well. Obviously, the digital native, as we like to call them, is very much in place in the workplace, and they've got different expectations of how things should be done and how they can be done more efficiently. And I guess, again, going back to that idea of some of the more antiquated processes, have you seen that sort of generational shift in the people that are actually working within your team, working within the business as a whole, impacting how you do things as well?
Yeah, very much so. And I think this has been a surprise internally within the business also, but traditionally you would have seen partners maintaining that partner-to-partner relationship. And there's a lot of referrals that go on between law firms, accounting firms, and they all have their networks that they refer work to or receive referrals from, and they spend a lot of time and effort, obviously, on that. But what we are starting to see now is while those relationships still exist and they are still as important as ever, generally what you'll see is one partner sort of delegate to a junior who, might be quite a bit younger in that sort of next generation. And they'll be asked to go to market and get me 3 prices for this particular piece of work. And so I guess where previously they would have been on the phones calling to their networks, now it's very much 3 website forms submitted. Can you give me a price on this? Here's the scope of the work. And then there might be a few phone calls back and forth to clarify things and get pricing and all of that. But it's what happens is it then comes back up to the partner on the other side who then sees it and goes, oh, well, I'd worked with Joe for 20 years. Why didn't they just call me? But you're starting to see that the younger generation have a different method of achieving that goal, and it's largely technology driven. And I think we'll probably see that continue more, but it sort of leads to the importance of your website needs to be doing what you want it to do. People need to get on there and be able to achieve what they're looking for when they make that visit. So it is interesting starting to see some of these things play out across the generation. It'll be interesting even more, I guess, with AI sort of weaving into everything, how that changes again.
No, I find it both fascinating and terrifying that we've got really no idea what's going to happen from an AI perspective when you look at how things have changed over the last 18 months to 2 years. It's like you just couldn't have comprehended that at that point in time. So yeah, slightly terrifying, but you've mentioned AI a couple of times. Are there any particular ways that you're using it that are having a meaningful impact for you and your team at the moment?
Yeah, so we're dabbling in it, as I think anyone is. I wouldn't say we're the experts yet, but where we're starting is we're beginning to build agents. So co-pilot agents just internally first. So we're working on a couple at the moment just around improving efficiencies and, implementing some coaching type agents. So that's probably the deep dive we're in at the moment. There are a few other projects that I want to tackle soon, which might be around AI-driven lead scoring and starting to think about ways that we can sort of weave it into other processes that we have. I think we use it similar to other firms in terms of drafting social media, doing qualitative analysis on things and drafting summaries, all those sorts of things. But I was reading something by Forrester last week that was very much talking around the evolution of moving from automation to AI agents to then generative AI, and how to really make the most of your generative AI or any of your AI is having that foundation of automation in place first. And so, yeah, we are starting to think about, okay, well, we do have an amazing tech stack. We've spent 10 years building it. So how do we make the most of that by sort of starting to weave AI into these processes? But yeah, if you don't have that tech stack, it's like, well, how do you make sure your data is correct, and how do you make sure your processes are documented to begin that journey?
Yeah, so making sure the automation between your existing systems is as good as it can be before you start introducing AI into it as well. I mean, it goes back to one of your original points that unless the data and the content's consistent across the board, then the output from an AI tool is only ever going to be as good as the input. And if the input's confusing because it's coming from lots of different places and it's different in different places, then you're probably not going to get a particularly cohesive answer out the other end. But it sounds like you're doing some pretty sophisticated stuff, and maybe you're a bit further ahead than others in the space. What sort of advice would you give to organizations who are just starting out in terms of some of those automation systems, building up the kind of relationship intelligence that you've got across your systems at the moment?
So I think one mistake people often make is they say they'll bring in a more sophisticated system, but then they'll just match the process that they had internally already.
Yeah.
So it's about using that as an opportunity to rethink the process. So it's like, do you have your sales cycle documented already? If not, don't plug your brand new CRM into just doing what you previously did, which also wasn't working. So I think it's very much around make sure that you've had all those upfront discussions and collaboration with everyone around what is the process that we want it to actually do. And I think that's the bit that often gets skipped, where people just assume that process is the way it always has been. Okay, the CRM's not working for me anymore, or marketing automation, or whatever it is. Let's just plug this new one in without actually stepping back and thinking about, is this strategically doing what we want it to do? So I think that's often one of the big things. And then very much around sort of what I touched on earlier as well, is celebrating the wins. Like you have to be your proponent of success within the firm. You need to be telling the stories of how you're getting those wins, and don't rely on other people to do that. And I think as marketers, particularly if we're more introverted inclined, we don't sell our successes as well as the sales team does. So it's, you have to take control of your influence within the business, and how are you, celebrating your wins and making sure everyone knows about it, so that, you're building that momentum to continue on with making those improvements to systems or processes or whatever it is that you want to do.
So true. It's the age-old thing of every marketing team, or I've got a PR background, and I remember, working for agencies, and we never did any of our own PR. Our LinkedIn page was terrible, our own comms was terrible, but we were focusing all our efforts on our clients. But I guess that's the same thing, right? When you're in an in-house role, you're so focused on your clients, the rest of the business, that you don't necessarily think about sharing the value of your own team. But it is so important. One thing I think as well that we haven't really touched on, but I know from previous conversations, it's something that you've been thinking a lot about. And again, it comes back to the data point, and I guess connecting the sort of old ways of doing things with the new ways of doing things, but systems around, or tools around, relationship intelligence. I know that, again, that's something that you've been looking into, and just interested to hear how you think that plays out in today's professional services space.
Yeah, so I think relationship intelligence is one of those tools that's severely underrated. And again, thinking back to how do I get easy wins within the business? If I was doing what we've done here again, I would not launch a CRM without a relationship intelligence tool in it, because it's about, give the partners what they need straight away, so that the moment they enter this new system, and you've got, a limited amount of time to win them over with it. And this could apply for any B2B business really, but give them the things that is going to give them value straight away. So it's not just a glorified phone book. It's, I can go in and I can see who has relationships with who. It prevents all those emails around the whole business of, does anyone know such and such at this business? It's pretty incredible. And relationship tools are continuing to get better and better in terms of, looking at email traffic and meeting traffic and all those sorts of things. So, I'm a big fan of them, and we're now starting to look at, well, how do we get that data out of the systems, like through APIs into a data warehouse, and think about, looking at a broader scale of what does the buying journey look like for clients of certain offerings or industries? How many touch points does it take from a marketing perspective, but also from a business face-to-face perspective, or via phone calls or whatever? And with some of that data, you can then start to map out those journeys and get an understanding of, okay, what does our buying group look like? How many touch points do we need to hit? And then you can start to craft your campaigns to reflect that. Big fan of relationship intelligence.
Yeah, nice. I think we're coming towards the end, and so I'm going to close out on some slightly softer questions, less around all the lessons and learnings that you've got from all the projects and implementations you've been part of, but more just thinking about your career in general and some of the experiences that you've had, I guess, working across multiple countries and industries. Have there been any sort of milestones or highlight moments for you?
Yeah, very much. I think sort of touching back to beginning that journey of like being handed all the digital things and just enjoying that. Like that was obviously a turning point. Before that, I was really 50-50 of, do I go down the more comms, like pure comms route, or stay with the technology side? So that was part of it. I think there was moments as well around, so when I worked for the UK Department of Health, it was quite funny actually. I was very junior and I was just working on sort of maintaining the back end of the website and email inbox. But one day a call went out, oh, does anyone know how to touch type? And I'd learned it at school, and so no one in the entire ministerial department could touch type. So I got lumped into, they were doing an online Q&A with the Secretary of Health, and I was like,
Sort of nervously put your hand up.
yeah, I was like 24 or something, next to the Secretary of Health, and like all these comms people around getting questions in. And they're like, no, no, don't say that. And I'm like typing as fast as I can and like fixing typos and all those sorts of things. But I think again, it was a good learning in terms of, high pressure situation and getting
Yeah.
that confidence from it. Another one was probably when I was at the Law Society. The Queensland government had made some changes and we were sending out tweets, and it's like crafting those tweets was a real journey, but they ended up getting quoted in Hansard and used in the media and all those sort of things. Then probably the last one was very much around beginning the marketing automation journey. So that really broadened my world in terms of what was possible in technology. And I really threw myself headfirst into that in terms of just trying to learn everything I could, because it took me from this mindset of campaigns are these isolated things where you send an email and they get the report and then that's about it. You hand it over to sales, where marketing automation sort of all of a sudden, it was almost like a 3D moment of stepping back going, okay, well, what do we want that experience to look like for that client, and what does it look like long term as well? So I think those are probably some of the big learning curves, and also those sort of moments where my career has probably gone in different directions.
Yeah, and it feels like there's definitely been a sort of common theme of tech underlying it all to some extent. So that sort of willingness to embrace tech and understand it and get on board with it and recognize the benefits of it, which is awesome. And then you fast forward to today, where you're in the role that you're in, but you also host your own podcast, Tech Powered Growth for Professional Services. So opportunity to plug your own podcast. What can listeners expect if they tune into that?
Yeah, so I do that with James Fielding from Kamoji, and it's very much, we did a report last year and it's based on a survey around where professional services firms were at in their sort of technological evolution, but particularly in terms of marketing and BD, so MarTech. And so it started off just sort of talking about the results of that, and then it's very much evolved into finding people in that space who are doing interesting and, I guess, industry leading things, and trying to just share tips with them, because very much a lot of the industry body around professional services marketing and BD is technology is part of it, but it's not really driven by it. There's still a lot of the coaching and more of those traditional skills in most of the education, where what we were trying to do is provide another platform for people of, this is how you can use technology to drive your marketing and BD efforts, and this is how you can use it to get ahead. So yeah, encourage anyone to listen to it. And we do have a new report coming out in the next few weeks, so there'll be a new episode coming out soon.
Nice, very exciting. We'll keep an eye out, or an ear out, I suppose. And last question that we always like to ask all of our guests on the podcast is, Take a Closer Look is really all about kind of giving people access to leading voices in the industry, people who have been there, done that, learnt the lessons, and giving people that sort of 30 to 40 minutes of hearing from others and kind of carving their own path in a similar way if they want to. So what would be your advice for anyone who is looking to take a similar path to you and kind of come out to where you are now from a career perspective? What would be your tips?
I think be curious and say yes to everything. So like, your mindset to the task that you're given, even in the most boring task, there's usually a silver lining of something that you can learn. And I often think about it, we have an extremely tedious task that we're hoping to automate soon, but is around converting leads after campaigns. But if you manually go in and spend an hour converting leads, you can tell whether your campaign is going to be successful or not, because you can see the exact sort of people that have come through your campaign. Are they the right ICP? Are they the buyer persona? And all of a sudden, you're doing this manual task to thinking strategically around, is this campaign achieving what we wanted it to achieve? So I think my advice for people would be, always be curious, like roll your sleeves up, jump into the stuff that might not look like fun work on the surface, but you'll find that there's always something interesting underneath. And if you say yes to everything, that'll get noticed, and all of a sudden you'll be given more things and different things and interesting, and your career goes from there. So yeah, I think just be curious and always be willing to jump in and help.
give things a go. Even if you don't know what you're doing, fix the website.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciated your time. It's been great to chat to you, and we'll be keeping an eye out for that next episode of your podcast too.
Great. Thanks very much for having me.